Okay, 30 to 50%. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering death rate reported by the World Health Organization, and it's absolutely crucial for understanding the immediate gravity of this outbreak. We aren't just dealing with a highly contagious pathogen here. We're up against a disease that literally claims the lives of up to half of the people it infects. But to really grasp why the specific outbreak is setting off alarm bells worldwide, we need to zero in on exactly where it's happening and what strain we're actually fighting. And that brings us straight to the front lines. Right now, the epicenter of the crisis is heavily concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ituri province. But it doesn't stop there. Cases are also spilling over into neighboring Uganda, even reaching its capital city, Kampala. What makes this particular spread so incredibly concerning is the strain responsible, the Bundibujo virus. As we're going to see, this specific strain throws a whole host of unique curveballs at the medical professionals and aid workers desperately trying to contain it. Now, when we look at the latest numbers from the CDC, it really grounds the reality of the situation. The DRC is bearing the absolute brunt of this crisis right now, with 282 confirmed cases and 42 confirmed deaths, plus a really troubling 220 suspected cases. Over in Uganda, they're reporting 9 confirmed cases and 1 death. At first glance, you might think, okay, those official figures look relatively contained, but the reality on the ground? It paints a much, much darker picture. Because official figures rarely capture a virus that operates in the shadows. Because beneath those official numbers lies a massive, hidden crisis. First off, unlike recent outbreaks, there is currently no approved vaccine for this specific Bundibugyo strain. None. Worse yet, delayed detection has severely crippled the initial response. The International Rescue Committee is warning that a terrifyingly low 20% of contacts are actually being traced. Add in the tragic casualties among frontline healthcare workers, including doctors, and some very deep community mistrust, and you've got a perfect storm for rapid, completely undetected transmission. Actually, Rachel Howard, she's a senior technical emergency health advisor over at the IRC, summed it up with a pretty chilling thought. She pointed out that the true scale of this outbreak is likely far worse than official figures suggest. You see, the virus may have been circulating completely under the radar for up to 3 months before the very first official case was even flagged in March. Think about that. When 4 out of 5 contacts are slipping through the cracks, multiple transmission chains just lock themselves into these communities. The outbreak is, quite frankly, already miles ahead of the response. So this begs a massive question. How on earth does a virus just seemingly disappear, sometimes for months or even years, and then suddenly pop back up to spark a brand new outbreak? Historically, we used to think of Ebola strictly as an acute thing, an immediate spillover event from wild animals to humans. But the latest data, it has completely forced scientists to rethink the very nature of the virus itself. If you map out the timeline based on recent mathematical modeling, it is honestly mind-blowing. Look at the massive gaps in time. In the Republic of Guinea, an outbreak was sparked by a strain that was almost identical to one seen 5 or 6 years earlier. And in the DRC, a 2021 outbreak was linked directly back to a survivor from the 2019 outbreak. So the virus didn't come from a new animal spillover at all, it was hiding right in plain sight. The answer to this mystery? It's a phenomenon called viral persistence. This is basically a terrifying biological loophole. What happens is the Ebola virus clears out of a survivor's bloodstream, so they test negative, they look and feel fully recovered, but the virus physically hides out in immune-privileged parts of the body. We're talking about fluids like semen, where the RNA can be detected up to 272 days later, or the aqueous humor of the eyes, even breast milk. This entirely transforms Ebola from an acute hemorrhagic fever into essentially an emerging sexually transmissible infection. From a public health perspective, this is a mathematical nightmare. Traditionally, infectious disease models assume that once someone recovers, they're immune and they're safe. But because of viral persistence, that recovered group tragically loops right back around into exposing the susceptible group again. Researchers have realized that just lowering the reproductive number below 1 isn't a guarantee for eradication anymore. The virus literally has built-in sleeper cells. Now, surviving the acute infection is, without a doubt, a huge victory. Keep in mind, untreated Ebola historically kills 50 to 90% of the people it infects. And today, thanks to new monoclonal antibody therapies, people are surviving at much higher rates. But when we look a little closer at the aftermath, we realize that for the patient, survival is really just the beginning of an entirely new, exhausting battle. Get this, recent data shows that a staggering 86.7% of treated survivors from the DRC's 2020 outbreak experience long-term health effects. Less than 14% walk away completely unscathed. And we aren't talking about a lingering cough here. These are severe, life-altering conditions that persist for over 3 years after the patients are supposedly cured. Breaking those numbers down, the reality of these post-Ebola conditions is just devastating. Over 61% of survivors suffer from persistent neurological symptoms. Nearly half are dealing with severe musculoskeletal pain, and many face late-onset eye complications. And here is the deeply ironic and scientifically frustrating part. Patients treated with advanced monoclonal antibodies like REGN-EB3 and ZMapp actually showed high incidences of these exact complications. So improved survival rates, unfortunately, seem to mean an improved chance of living with chronic pain. So when you combine this chronic suffering with the hidden, lingering nature of the virus, you can really start to understand the extreme community mistrust we talked about earlier. People are terrified. They see patients leaving treatment centers, only to live with chronic, visible pain. This intense fear fuels protests against safe burial protocols, which obviously disrupt deeply held local rights. And it's even led to infected patients actively fleeing the treatment centers, which of course just accelerates the outbreak. It's this vicious, heartbreaking cycle of fear and transmission. The WHO Director General recently made a really critical point while calling for a ceasefire in the conflict-ridden Ituri region. He emphasized that medical science alone cannot stop this. Defeating the outbreak requires absolute community cooperation. Right now, violence from rival armed groups in the area is heavily disrupting medical tracing and relief efforts. And without the community feeling safe enough to actively participate in early detection, the virus is just going to keep outpacing our response. Which brings us to a really tough question we absolutely have to answer. We now know, as a scientific fact, that biological survivors can inadvertently trigger future outbreaks years down the line because the virus hides in their bodies. So how can global health systems effectively monitor, treat, and support these survivors over the long haul without casting a permanent shadow of stigma over the very people who managed to beat the disease? It's a wildly complex problem of public health and human empathy, and it's one we absolutely must solve before the next outbreak strikes.